It's late at night. The city is asleep. A quiet convenience store stands in silence. But it's in moments like this that the most unexpected stories unfold. No one can predict what comes next, and that's what makes this night so tense. Stay with us until the very end. The twist will surprise you. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know where our viewers are tuning in. The night pressed down on the city like a heavy blanket, quiet and empty, in a way that made even the hum of a distant streetlight sound louder than it should. STEVEN Seagal drove steadily through the streets, his eyes focused, but his body aching from the brutal training session he had just finished. He had pushed himself harder than usual, the kind of training that left his muscles burning and his mind sharp, a rhythm he had lived with for decades. The SUV rolled across almost deserted roads, and the occasional flicker of neon from a diner or a gas station was the only reminder that the city was still alive at this hour. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that made every sound feel important. Gravel crunched beneath his tires as he turned onto a smaller street. Stephen wasn't looking for trouble. All he wanted was something cold to drink before heading home. The workout had drained him, and now, with sweat drying on his skin, he felt the dryness in his throat stronger than anything else. Ahead, he noticed a faint glow. A convenience store, its tired neon sign buzzing faintly, the letters promising 24-hour service. He slowed down, pulled into the small lot, and parked. The SUV clicked softly as he cut the engine. He sat still for a moment, the silence around him interrupted only by the faint ticking of the cooling engine. He reached over, grabbed his training bag, and stepped out into the cool air of the night. The lot was mostly empty. A lone car sat off to one side, dark and unmoving, and the store's front windows glowed under the sickly light of flickering lamps. Stephen's boots scraped lightly against the gravel as he walked toward the entrance. He muttered something under his breath, just a quiet thought about getting in and out quickly, his voice low enough that only he could hear it. The automatic doors slid open with a tired hiss, and sterile fluorescent light spilled out, washing over him as he stepped inside. The store was quiet. Too quiet. A handful of customers moved slowly through the aisles. One older man was bent over, comparing labels on soup cans as if he had all the time in the world. A younger guy, college age maybe, stood with a basket filled with frozen meals, staring at the shelves without real focus. Another person wandered in the snack aisle, picking things up and putting them back down without much interest. Their movements felt sluggish, their presence like background noise more than life. Behind the counter sat a young cashier. She leaned against her hand, her chin propped up as she tapped absently at her phone with the other. Her posture screamed boredom and exhaustion, the way people look when they are counting the minutes until their shift ends. The oversized shirt she wore hung loose, her shoulders slouched forward. She barely looked up when Stephen walked in, though her eyes flicked once in his direction and then dropped again to the screen. The faint sound of a radio drifted from overhead speakers, the DJ's voice almost drowned by the buzzing of the lights above. Stephen moved slowly down the aisle, scanning the shelves. The fluorescent lights hummed in that unnatural way that never allowed real comfort. He picked up a cold bottle of water, the condensation wet against his hand, and for a moment, it felt like exactly what he had come for. But then, as he turned toward the counter, something made him pause. The silence had weight to it, thicker than it should have been. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't just emptiness, but anticipation, a stillness that prickled the back of his neck. He knew that feeling well. Years of training and experience had carved into him the instinct to notice when the air itself was holding its breath. He looked around again, studying the scene more carefully. The customers were there, yes, but their movements seemed disconnected, as though the space didn't belong to them. The cashier, though distracted, tapped her foot nervously against the counter. Steven took in the details quickly, efficiently, without breaking stride. The exit was behind him, the aisles to either side cluttered with products that could serve as obstacles or cover. The ceiling lights were bright, but one in the corner flickered unsteadily, casting an uneven rhythm of shadow and light across the floor. He walked to the cooler in the back, opened the door, and let the blast of cold air hit him. The bottles inside rattled faintly as he grabbed one more. He let the door close slowly behind him, watching the reflection in the glass just long enough to remind himself of where everyone stood. Then he moved toward the counter, water bottle in hand, every sense sharp, though his expression stayed calm. The cashier finally glanced up again as he approached. For the briefest second, her eyes lingered on him, as if she felt something different about his presence compared to the others. Then her gaze slid away, and she adjusted her phone in her hand. Steven placed the bottle on the counter, and she rang it up without a word. Her movements were mechanical, almost impatient, as though this interaction was just another in a long chain of dull transactions. Steven reached into his pocket, pulled out some bills, and slid them across the counter. But even as he did, his focus wasn't on her. His attention was spread outward, tracing every sound, every small shift in the space around him. The hum of the refrigerators, the faint shuffle of feet in the next aisle, the irregular flicker of the faulty light. He didn't know yet what was coming, but he could feel it. Something was wrong, and the stillness of the night outside had followed him into this place. The cashier handed him his change, with a barely audible thanks. Steven gave a short nod, slipped the bottle into his hand, and stepped slightly to the side. He didn't leave. Not yet. His instincts told him this wasn't a night for rushing. He leaned against the nearby rack, unscrewed the cap of the bottle, and took a long drink. The cold water slid down his throat, refreshing but grounding too, keeping his mind clear. He let his eyes travel the store again, more deliberate this time, taking in the posture of the customers, the way they moved, the way they didn't. The silence was still there, but heavier now, thicker. He exhaled slowly and let the bottle hang at his side. His reflection in the cooler's glass door showed a man who looked calm, but every muscle was ready, every thought sharp. He had felt nights like this before, and he knew exactly what they meant. The peace was only temporary. Something was about to break. Would you like me to continue straight into Chapter 2 when you give the next signal? The first sign came with the sound of the front door slamming open, louder and harsher than they ever should have been. The tired hiss of the automatic mechanism was drowned out by the violent crash of glass and metal as three figures burst inside. Steven turned his head just slightly, his eyes narrowing as he watched them enter. He had been waiting for something, and now it was here. The leader came in first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the kind of aggression that tried to control a room instantly. A dark hoodie was pulled low over his head, his face half hidden in shadow, but his eyes burned with a kind of arrogance that was unmistakable. In his right hand, gleamed the shape of a pistol, held firmly, as though it gave him complete power over everything around him. Behind him, 2 others followed. The second was wiry, smaller in build, sweat already shining across his forehead despite the cool air-conditioned room. His eyes darted from side to side, restless, like he was looking for a way out even before anything began. The third was the youngest, barely older than a teenager, his movements exaggerated as he tried to puff out his chest, his fists balled tightly. But the fear in his eyes betrayed him, his bravado only a thin mask for nerves. The customers froze where they stood. The older man in the soup aisle immediately crouched low, his basket left behind as he ducked behind a shelf. The college kid holding frozen meals stiffened, then slowly slid down against the freezer, his breathing shallow. Another shopper in the snack aisle dropped a bag of chips that hit the floor with a soft crackle before they scrambled out of sight. The air in the store changed instantly, the stillness turning sharp, filled with panic. The leader's voice cut through it all. "All right, listen up," he barked, his words slicing through the silence. He raised the gun high, then swung it toward the counter where the cashier sat. She froze, her eyes wide, the phone still clutched in her trembling hand. "Empty the register," the man snapped. "Now. Don't make me wait." The young woman's face went pale, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak but couldn't. Her throat bobbed, and she dropped the phone with a clatter on the counter. Her hands hovered uncertainly over the touchscreen of the register, her fingers trembling so hard she could barely touch the right keys. The machine beeped in error, a sharp sound that only seemed to make the room more tense. The wiry man moved a few steps into the store, pacing back and forth near the aisles, his eyes flicking to the cameras above, then to the doors, then back to the leader. His hands twitched nervously, tugging at the sleeves of his hoodie. The youngest planted himself near a display rack, trying to stand tall, but his breathing was uneven. He clenched and unclenched his fists, as if trying to summon courage he didn't really have. Steven stood 3 paces from the counter, the water bottle still in his hand. His stance relaxed, but steady. He didn't move toward the robbers, but he didn't retreat either. He had seen scenes like this before, enough times to know the danger in sudden movement. Instead, he let his presence settle into the room like a rock in the middle of a current. His eyes studied each man in turn, the leader with his gun, confident but reckless. The wiry one already close to breaking. The youngest, fragile and unsure. Steven's breathing was even, his posture unthreatening, but beneath it all he was preparing, waiting for the moment the balance would shift. The cashier fumbled again at the register. Another sharp beep rang out, and the leader slammed his free hand on the counter. "Move faster!" he shouted, his voice cracking with irritation. The girl flinched, her shoulders shaking as she tried again, finally unlocking the screen. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't dare wipe them away. She could barely see the buttons through the blur. The leader's gun followed her every movement. His finger twitched dangerously close to the trigger as his impatience grew. He glanced briefly around the store, scanning the crouched customers, and then his eyes landed on Steven. Recognition didn't flash in his eyes the way it had with the cashier earlier. Instead, it was suspicion, a sudden awareness that this man wasn't reacting like the others. "Hey, you," the leader growled, pointing the gun briefly toward Steven. "Hands where I can see them." Stephen raised his hand slowly, palms open, his voice calm when he spoke. "Easy," he said evenly. "She's doing what you asked." The leader sneered, tilting the gun slightly in Stephen's direction. "You sound like you're giving orders. You think you're in charge here?" "I'm not," Stephen replied, his tone steady, his expression unchanged. "But pointing that gun at her face isn't going to make her move any faster." For a second, the leader's jaw tightened. He didn't like the words, but he couldn't argue with them either. The wiry man muttered from near the aisle, "Come on, man, we're burning time. Just get the money." His voice trembled as he said it, his eyes still darting nervously toward the exit. The register finally chimed, and the drawer slid open with a metallic clack. Neat stacks of bills lay inside, exposed under the harsh fluorescent light. The cashier's hands hovered over them, trembling, frozen in place, as if taking them would break her completely. The leader snapped his fingers harshly. "Bag it. All of it. Now." She bent down quickly, fumbling under the counter, until she found a small plastic sack. Her hands shook so badly that the bills slipped through her fingers as she tried to stuff them inside. The leader leaned closer, the barrel of his gun steady on her. "Faster," he hissed. The youngest shifted from foot to foot, his nerves cracking under the pressure. He gave a forced laugh that died instantly in the silence. The wiry man paced harder, his movements jittery, his hoodie clinging to him with sweat. The customers remained hidden, their fear palpable in the air. Stephen stood motionless, but every detail was etched in his mind. The way the leader's finger tapped the trigger, the trembling in the wiry man's shoulders, the false confidence in the youngest, the fragile breath of the cashier as she stuffed bills into the bag. The store was a powder keg now, one spark away from exploding. And Stephen knew that when it came, he would be the one to control the fire. The air inside the convenience store felt tight, as though every breath was trapped between the buzzing fluorescent lights and the cold tile floor. The cashier's hands shook so violently that the crumpled bill slipped out of her grip and scattered across the counter. The leader leaned in close, his voice low and rough, the muzzle of his gun hovering inches from her forehead. "Don't play with me. Bag it. Now." Her throat worked as she swallowed, her fingers fumbling clumsily with the plastic sack. Tears blurred her vision. Every movement seemed to take forever, and the red error flash on the register screen still echoed in her memory like a death sentence. Behind her, the wiry man's pacing grew frantic. His shoes whispered against the tile, quick circles of fear that he couldn't contain. "This is taking too long," he muttered, his voice climbing. "We said fast. We said in and out." The youngest tried to stand firm near the seasonal display rack, but his jaw quivered every time he swallowed. His fists tightened, loosened, tightened again. He wanted to appear hard, but his body betrayed the tremor that ran through him. His eyes flicked toward the leader, then toward the gun, then back at the floor. Stephen stood not far away, his body perfectly still, his hand still raised slightly. To anyone looking, he appeared calm, even passive, but every muscle in his frame was waiting, coiled and ready. He had spent decades in moments just like this, moments where panic drowned the room, but clarity sharpened his own mind. His breathing was measured, his gaze steady, each detail absorbed and filed away. The leader, emboldened by the fear around him, finally turned his eyes back toward Stephen. He tilted the gun away from the cashier just for a second, aiming it toward him instead. "And you," he spat, his lips curling into a sneer. "Standing there like you're made of stone. Think you're gonna be a hero tonight?" Steven's voice came low, controlled, unshaken. "I was just here for a drink." The leader smirked, tapping the side of the pistol with his finger. "You'll leave with more than that if you keep staring at me like that." The wiry man hissed, running a hand down his sleeve as though the nervous energy in his body needed somewhere to escape. "Let's just get the cash and go," he begged. "We're wasting time." The cashier stuffed the last stack of bills into the bag and pushed it across the counter with trembling hands. The plastic crinkled sharply in the silence. The leader didn't even look at it. His eyes were locked on Steven now, drawn to the stillness that unsettled him. "You," he said again, his voice dropping into something harsher. He stepped forward, his boots loud against the tile. Hands higher. "Show me you're not hiding anything." Steven complied, lifting his palms a little more, his movements slow and deliberate, his expression unchanged. "There's nothing here," he said simply. The leader narrowed his eyes, stepping closer until the barrel of the gun hovered at the bridge of Steven's nose. The silence stretched, the only sounds the trembling breath of the cashier and the faint buzz of the failing ceiling light. "You're too calm," the leader said, suspicion cracking through his sneer. "Men who are calm like this are hiding something." Steven's voice was steady, the tone of a man who had spent his life in control. "Men who talk like you are still deciding." The leader's jaw clenched. He pressed the muzzle harder against Steven's skin, a cold circle of metal that dug against bone. "Say that again," he hissed. The youngest shifted nervously, blurting out words he didn't mean to. "He's messing with you," he stammered, his voice too high. "He's buying time." The wiry man stopped pacing for a second, his eyes darting toward the glass doors. "We need to move. Cops could be on the way." His tone cracked under the weight of panic. The leader ignored them. His entire focus was on Steven, on the man who didn't flinch even with a gun pressed against him. For the first time since storming into the store, uncertainty flickered across his face. Steven saw it. He saw the tremor in the man's wrist, the microsecond of hesitation in his eyes, and he knew this was the moment. With sudden, precise movement, Steven's left hand shot up, trapping the leader's wrist and twisting sharply. The motion was fluid, honed by years of Aikido. The gun snapped upward as the leader cried out, his finger jerking the trigger by reflex. The shot thundered through the store, blasting into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down, and the lights flickered violently, plunging the store into strobing flashes of light and shadow. The cashier screamed, diving beneath the counter. Customers buried themselves deeper behind the shelves, their cries muffled by the chaos. Steven twisted harder, forcing the leader's wrist backward until the gun clattered to the ground. In the same motion, he shifted his weight and slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him staggering into a rack of chips. Bags burst open, showering the floor in neon-colored snacks as the man roared in pain. The wiry man panicked. "No, no, no!" he cried, spinning toward the exit. He barely made it 2 steps before Steven seized a nearby shopping cart and shoved it with brutal force. The wheel screeched across the tile before slamming into the man's legs. With a strangled yelp, he collapsed backward into the candy aisle. Shelves rattled, chocolate bars tumbling onto the floor around his groans. The youngest, shaking but desperate, lunged forward with a wild swing. His punch cut through the air uselessly as Steven sidestepped with smooth efficiency. In the same motion, he grabbed a heavy glass soda bottle from the display, twisted it sharply in his hand, and smashed it across the attacker's shoulder. The bottle exploded in a spray of sticky liquid, drenching the boy as he slipped on the wet floor and crashed hard onto his back. The leader, coughing against the wreckage of snacks, scrambled toward the gun lying on the floor. His fingers stretched toward the cold steel, but Steven's boot came down hard, pinning his wrist against the tiles. The man screamed, thrashing under the pressure, but the weight above him was unmovable. "You really chose the wrong night," Steven growled, his voice low and final. He yanked the man upright by his hoodie and slammed him into the nearby shelf. Metal clanged, and products tumbled down around them, the entire structure shuddering from the force. The wiry man whimpered from the candy aisle, his leg pinned awkwardly beneath the cart. He clawed weakly at the ground, sobbing in broken pleas. The youngest tried to crawl away, soda soaking through his clothes, his breath shallow and frantic. The store was chaos now. Shelves overturned, the air thick with plaster dust, the floor slick with spilled drinks. But at the center of it all, Steven stood calm, his breath steady, his movements deliberate. He had turned their moment of control into ruin in seconds, and none of them had the strength to rise against him again. The faint wail of sirens crept into the distance, growing louder with every second. Red and blue light flickered faintly across the store's front glass. The fight was over, and Steven knew it. The sirens grew louder, flashing lights painting the glass doors in red and blue streaks as they approached. Inside, the chaos of the store had settled into heavy silence. The robbers lay broken across the aisles, their arrogance stripped away. The leader slumped against the shelf where Steven had slammed him, his wrist pinned uselessly against the floor only moments earlier. His breathing was ragged, his face contorted with pain and humiliation. The wiry man whimpered from the candy aisle, his leg twisted awkwardly, sweat soaking his clothes as he tried and failed to crawl free. The youngest lay flat on the wet tiles, soda soaking through his hoodie, coughing weakly as he tried to catch his breath. Steven stood at the center of it all, his body still and steady, his gaze moving across the wreckage with the same calm he had carried from the start. His breathing was measured, not strained, his stance loose but controlled. Around him, the store bore the scars of the confrontation. Shelves tilted at odd angles, products scattered across the floor, plaster dust floating in the air from the bullet hole in the ceiling. The sickly sweet scent of spilled soda mixed with the acrid tang of gunpowder. The cashier slowly rose from behind the counter, her eyes wide, her phone still clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Her breath came in short gasps, her entire body shaking. For her, the nightmare wasn't over yet. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, making her knees weak. But when her gaze found Steven, something in her expression shifted. Shock gave way to disbelief. Disbelief gave way to relief. She swallowed hard, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. Steven gave her a small nod, his face calm, his tone steady. "It's done." The automatic doors hissed open just then, and 2 officers stormed in with weapons drawn. Their voices were sharp, commanding, filled with the urgency of men expecting chaos. "Hands up!" one barked, his eyes sweeping the scene. For a moment, both froze in disbelief. 3 men lay sprawled across the floor, groaning, defeated. One clutched his ribs, another lay trapped under an overturned shelf, the third whimpering against the sticky tiles. At the center stood Steven, his massive frame steady, his palms slowly lifting to show no threat. His voice came low, controlled, unthreatening. "Easy. They're done. The gun's over there." He tilted his head slightly toward the pistol, lying discarded on the floor. The officers exchanged quick glances before moving in. In practiced motions, they snapped cuffs onto the leader first. The man hissed through his teeth, glaring at Steven with eyes that still tried to burn with defiance, though his body sagged in defeat. "This ain't over," he spat, though the words lacked the fire he wanted them to carry. Steven leaned closer, his eyes cold, his tone sharp as steel. "It's over tonight." The leader's glare faltered, his pride cracking under the weight of the words as the officers dragged him toward the door. The wiry man sobbed broken pleas as he was hauled to his feet, his sweat-soaked hoodie clinging to him like a second skin. The youngest whimpered as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, his earlier bravado dissolved into quiet shame. The store began to come back to life slowly. Customers crept out from hiding, whispering in awe as they peeked over shelves, their eyes drawn to Steven. Phones appeared in shaky hands, some recording the aftermath, others snapping photos. The hole in the ceiling still leaked faint trails of plaster dust. The overturned displays still leaned precariously, but none of that mattered to them. Their attention was locked on the man who had stood against 3 armed attackers and left them broken. The cashier stepped shakily from behind the counter, her phone clutched tightly. Her eyes shone with a mix of tears and awe as she approached Steven. Her voice was small, almost timid, but filled with gratitude. "You saved my life," she said. Steven gave her a faint smile, his voice calm as ever. "Just did what had to be done." She hesitated, her fingers fumbling nervously with the phone. Then she looked up at him again, her voice trembling. Can I get a picture?" For the first time since the chaos began, Steven chuckled softly. "Of course." She stepped closer, standing beside him among the wreckage. He draped a light arm over her shoulder, careful not to overwhelm her trembling frame. Her phone clicked, capturing the moment. Criminals cuffed and dragged toward the doors, shelves leaning and products scattered. Red and blue lights flickering through the glass. And in the center of it all, she and Steven stood together, both smiling. Hers wide and disbelieving, his calm and steady. She looked down at the photo and let out a breathless laugh, half relief, half joy. This is the best night of my life." Steven glanced toward the counter, noticing bottles of soda stacked neatly despite the chaos around them. He gestured lightly toward them. "Mind if I still grab that drink?" Her smile widened, though her hand still trembled. "On the house." He twisted the cap open, taking a long drink as the cold liquid washed down the dust of the fight. He sighed softly, setting the bottle down on the counter. Now, the night's complete. The officers marched the robbers outside, their figures disappearing into the flashing lights. The automatic doors hissed shut behind them, sealing off the chaos from the night beyond. Slowly, the hum of the radio crept back into the air, mixing with the low murmur of shaken customers. Steven adjusted his bag on his shoulder, glanced once more at the cashier, and gave her a steady nod. "Stay safe." She nodded quickly, her eyes wet but shining. "I will." With that, Steven stepped toward the exit. The night air met him again as the doors opened, cool and steady against his skin. The parking lot glowed with the flicker of police lights, the criminals shoved into the backs of squad cars. Steven walked toward his SUV, his steps unhurried, the bottle of soda still cold in his hand. For the cashier, it was a night she would never forget. For the customers, it was a story they would retell in disbelief. And for Steven Seagal, it was just another reminder that calm focus and discipline could turn even the darkest chaos into order. And so, what seemed like just another ordinary night turned into a story that will be remembered for a long time. But this is only the beginning. Many more unexpected twists are still to come. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and ring the notification bell to be among the first to see our next releases. And don't forget to write in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see our viewers from around the world.